This is augforums.com Real Talk, an unfiltered, independent perspective on Acumatica Cloud ERP. My name is Tim Rodman, and I want to mention three things in this pre-recorded intro before we get started. First, thank you to our sponsors. Our first sponsor is Paya. Paya offers Acumatica users a suite of industry-leading payment orchestration tools. Far beyond native Acumatica payments, Paya enables EMV, NFC terminals for counter sale. They offer a frictionless customer portal through their click-to-pay solution, and they support most e-commerce platforms and point-of-sale solutions used with Acumatica, such as One Retail and AcuPOS. And best of all, omni-channel reconciliation is available for all of their solutions. Our second sponsor is DataSelf. DataSelf Analytics is a revolutionary reporting solution that enables organizations to make the most informed decisions faster and easier than ever. It uniquely simplifies business intelligence, empowers anyone to build and access dashboards, and delivers critical business insight when and where you need it. Our third sponsor is 24/7 Digitize. 24/7 Digitize is an Acumatica bookkeeping service provider that helps derive the best value from your Acumatica investment by maintaining your books utilizing Acumatica's best practices and guidelines. Please take a minute to support this podcast by clicking each one of the sponsor banners located at augforums.com/sponsors. Our sponsors track clicks, and every click helps to support this podcast. The second thing I'd like to mention is that I'm always looking for victims. I mean guests. If you use Acumatica in any capacity, no matter how small, I'd love to talk with you. Check out augforums.com/podcast and click the link near the top of the page to learn more about being a guest on the podcast. Third and finally, I'd love to see you listed on my Rolodex. Check out augforums.com/Rolodex to find out who else is using Acumatica and read the instructions at the top to see how you can add yourself to the list. All right, that's it for the pre-recorded intro. Let's get started. Today is Thursday, August 18th, 2022, and this is episode number 93, Mike Mahannah, a NetSuite user group experience. Hey, Mike, thanks for coming on today.
Glad to be here, Tim.
Hey, we might hear some construction noise in the background on my end. I'll try to keep myself muted, but I didn't want to postpone again. We tried to do this back in June, and we had a Ohio-wide power outage, me up in Columbus, you down in Cincinnati.
Yeah.
And so we had to reschedule. I didn't want to reschedule on you again, so just a heads up, you might hear some construction noise.
Very nice.
So maybe we could start off with your, we'll be talking about your experience with NetSuite user groups. So we who are involved with Acumatica user groups can glean some lessons that you might have learned from your experience with NetSuite. But before we get there, maybe you could give us your brief origin story. I even like to go back to where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school? And how did you get into this ERP world?
Yeah, good. Yeah, absolutely. So I was born in Dayton, Ohio, so not too far from where the group, the Acumatica group that you have gets together, and went there up until my freshman year in high school. And my father worked for General Motors and transferred out to Arizona's Desert Proving Ground. So I went to high school and started college out there, and it was great. I love the change of pace. It's beautiful out there. But I got about halfway through college and I wasn't sure where I was going to, go next, or what I was going to do. So I spent 4.5 years in the Coast Guard and enjoyed that aspect of it. Was a little concerned about leaving college and, am I going to go back and what am I going to do? And so, when I was in the Coast Guard, I was really just trying to do some traveling, experience life a little bit, and then figure out what I wanted to do when I grew up. And so I actually, the last 2 years, spent life as a dental technician in the Coast Guard and thought maybe dentistry is the way to go. And so when I graduated or got out of the Coast Guard, I went back to Arizona State and finished up my undergrad and thought, you know what, that's a long, long road, and I felt a little behind already. So I went into business and just happened to be working at a distributor that was using Profit 21, an old ERP. Some people might recognize that name, but they just said, look, you look like the smartest guy. Can you help us be the administrator for that? And that kind of started my world and started my life in the world of ERP. So I was their administrator, and then I went to work for Profit 21, who eventually became Activate Solutions, but worked, as a consultant, traveled 100%, left, or left home on Sunday, and then came back on Friday. And it was fun. It was enjoyable at the time, but was not sustainable. I just don't know that anybody that can do that is, my hat's off to them. It's a tough life. But I learned a lot about business and companies. And so eventually kind of stayed in the software space, went to property management for a little while, but really just enjoyed what technology can bring to companies. And so I've pretty much stayed in tech since that time. Did a little time as at a regional bank here in Cincinnati, Fifth Third Bank. Learned what IT looks like in a big organization like that, and thought, I'm going to go back to ERP and really have spent most of the time in the NetSuite ERP or ecosystem since then. But now I'm kind of in a role as the director of partnership and alliances for 3G TMS, or PaceJet. And I love it because it's the relational side of things, but still in that sort of, ERP space. And it really broadens the ERPs that I'm involved in. And so that getting involved in the Acumatica community has been great. Really enjoyed seeing some of the differences, but really a lot of the similarities in the people that are involved, whether they're customers or partners, or consultants, that are trying to help companies get the most of it. So it's been a long road, one that I certainly enjoyed, and I'm glad to be here talking to you today.
I got to ask you, I see on your LinkedIn profile under the MBA that you did at Xavier, you got SAS data mining listed on there. Did you ever do anything with that in the real world, or was that just a school experience?
That was a school experience. I mean, the classes, the electives that I had were focused on BI, and back in 2009, it was like, okay, what is BI going to do for these places, and for companies, and so even today, I think sometimes it's a little elusive depending on what partner, customer, or industry you're looking at, but. I thought that was kind of like the future of what things look like. And so I really wanted to focus on that and took, some classes on it and wanted to make sure that I was as marketable as possible when I graduated.
Yeah, it just caught my eye. I know someone who's in that world, and it's interesting to me. So I thought you might have some more insight there.
Yeah.
But it looks like you got into NetSuite when you were at Round Tower Technologies around September 2013. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, well, so I'd actually, when I was at a company called Dominate, we were a software company, kind of going through heavy acquisitions, really to get, we'll say fat enough to get acquired. And so, much like a lot of NetSuite companies that are trying to, go IPO, they bought NetSuite and I implemented it there. And so when I was talking to the owner of Round Tower Technologies and said, yeah, I had implemented NetSuite, and he said, well, we're trying to implement that right now, and we could really use your help. And so it was just a really good fit for them and where they were. And so in that aspect, knowing that ERP and having done that for another organization kind of paved the way for me to spend the time that I did at Round Tower. And again, it was a great experience because you're kind of taking the fundamentals of ERP, but instead of implementing it, you're implementing it in your internal organization, which was almost scary at times because, if you look at larger organizations where typically consultants go in, you're fixing a problem that's, 5, 10 years old, and it's the people that are kind of implemented are no longer there. And so it's a legacy product. But, here it was a little scary because if it didn't work out, the only person they could blame was me. And so I was excited, but a little worried that okay, I don't make sure that we design this and implement it in a way that keeps the organization going, and it did. So I was pretty proud of that.
That's awesome. Yes, it's been about 10 years since you've been involved with NetSuite. And around what year did you start getting involved with a NetSuite user group specifically? And I can't remember, was it in Columbus, or did you start off in
Yeah,
Cincinnati, or how'd that
yeah.
happen?
So I was at Velocio, and they were based out of Columbus, but had a Cincinnati office. And in December of 2017, we started the Ohio NetSuite user group. And there, all the meetings we had were in Columbus. We met on a quarterly basis, and it was the Ohio NetSuite user group. So we got people to come from obviously Cincinnati, Columbus, Toledo, Cleveland. I mean, it was literally the entire state of Ohio where users were coming from there. And so that, demographic or group size kind of drove us to a particular format for it. And, I know there are a variety of different things. Other user groups that I've seen have different formats, but, what we found with the people that were joining is if they were driving 2 hours to come to the meeting, it's like, okay, we've got to have something that is meaty enough in long enough that it's, hey, I'm not going to drive 2 hours for an hour meeting. It's just, 2 hours one way. So, it kind of drove what we wanted to do. And so our meetings, we started at 10 a.m. and went until 2. And we felt like that was enough time for us to have enough content and things for people to come. And so it worked out really well. I know some people will have, afternoon, or maybe they'll do early morning. All of our sessions were in person, so we didn't have any remote aspects of it. I felt like we looked at it, considered it, but I just felt like the in-person aspects and some of the technology that, the issues with technology when you can't hear people, or somebody's trying to present and it just doesn't pop up on the screen. So we eliminate a lot of those. And really the value of the user group, in my perspective, is the interactions of people. And if people are remote, it's harder to have those interactions.
I totally agree with that. I'd like to pick your brain more on the format that you kind of fell into and lessons learned. But before we get there, maybe we could back up and talk about the genesis of it. If I'm listening and I'm someone who uses Acumatica and I live in some random place, maybe it's even a decent sized city, And I'm thinking to myself, there's got to be other people around here who use Acumatica, like to get together, but I don't even know how to get started.
Yeah.
How did that happen for you guys? Sound like you were at Velocio, which was a NetSuite VAR. So maybe you all fronted the cost for that. But what did that initial meeting look like? Did you basically just need to book a room and get some food, or how'd you get it off the ground?
Yeah, so we originally started with people that we knew, were our customers, and then we also knew about other VARs or consulting companies in the area that had customers, and so we reached out to them and told them about it. And I think it's one of those things where when we're starting, people are like, oh yeah, I'd love to do that, but they just never do. And so it just takes one person to kind of step forward and say, okay, let's do this. And I think for the other VARs that were in the area, it made a lot of sense, because and to me, it was one of those kind of all boats rise with the tide. And so it's like, sure, we may compete for customers, but we're still supporting this community. And I think that, the stronger that community is, and a user group is a great litmus test of that strength of that community, is, do we have options for customers to interact with other stakeholders, whether that's a VAR, another end user, or another software, company that, or what we call independent software vendor that is associated with that. So we reached out to other VARs, and then we ultimately went back to NetSuite. So I think whatever ERP, in this case Acumatica, I know that they are very pro, starting user groups, and so when we reached out to NetSuite, they said yes, we can send out emails. They didn't give us a list of customers in the area, but they did send an email out and sent them to a landing page that we had created for people to come. And I think our first group, we probably had 20 people. And these were, I would say half of them were people that we had already had conversations with in person, or, on the phone, and they were committed to going. The other half just said, okay, I heard about it and I showed up and here I am. But, as far as the logistics of it, we had reserved a room at, oddly enough, we were in Columbus, but we were at the Ohio University remote campus. So we rented a room at their remote campus. It was relatively inexpensive. And then we also had a sponsor come in. I believe R Smart was the one that started it with us. And so they covered lunch, and that kind of covered all of our costs. So I think that, when you look at spaces, we talked about with the group after that first session, or during that first session, how, where can we go? Do people want to move to different locations? And so we talked about, finding a customer that had enough space, and it was tough to do that, particularly as the group started to grow. So we decided to stay at that location, and just, it wasn't too much of a cost for us to reserve the room, and then, the lunch was the biggest piece of that. So
Yeah, I think getting the place is the hardest part when you're starting off, right? And
yeah,
here in Columbus, or the Acumatica user group, I work at a co-working place, and so I'm able to book it for $100, which is pretty reasonable. But that's, a lot of people don't have that situation. Do you remember? I love transparent details, so you might not remember, but it's okay. Do you remember how much that room cost at Ohio University for that first meeting?
yeah, I think the room was probably somewhere like the $200 to $300
Okay,
for
that
the
sounds about
yeah.
right.
Yeah. So it wasn't too bad. And I will say, one of the things, because we were the Ohio NetSuite user group, we looked, all of our meetings were in Columbus, and what we found over time is we picked up more people, but they were in Columbus. And, some of the other further people, there were one or two that still made the travel, but most of them were in Columbus. And so I think when you do choose a location, it's important to stay there because people are familiar with the space, and you can establish a rhythm with them. But I think that you also will get people in that area. And so one of the things that we did or talked about doing was, do we rotate between, Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati? And so, that way we still remain the Ohio NetSuite user group for the people in Cincinnati. It's an easier join if they're going to do it in Cincinnati. And then they would go, maybe make the drive to Columbus, but then Cleveland gets it's a tougher drive. And so you're probably not going to pick them up. So, that's always the struggle, is how big, of a user group do you have? And I think that, the Columbus attendees grew, and so it was good. And so you could, I think there's probably over time, there's more people in a community than probably you originally think. So if you started it and you met quarterly, and for the first, 3 quarters, you had roughly around the same amount of people, I think you'll start to see more and more people as they become aware of it. And the only way that's going to happen is just sharing some of the experiences. And I think Tim, you do a good job of, sharing those experiences and having other people that are there share those experiences.
So did you ever try the idea of moving it around to different cities? Sounds like a logistical nightmare to me. Did you try it?
So we did. And so one of the things we looked at was saying, okay, because we are the Ohio group, we should probably rotate between Cincinnati, Cleveland, and Columbus. And, obviously if you're in Cincinnati, then it's easier for you to get there. And so you'll probably show up more. But, we didn't have any space that we were, able to book really. And, the problem then is if you're in Cincinnati, you're only going to pick up Cincinnati people in Columbus. More than likely, somebody from Cleveland is not going to drive to Cincinnati.
So basically you're creating additional groups, maybe without realizing it. You're not really taking the same group around.
Yes. Yeah.
That makes sense.
That was the risk. But I think that, like anything, if that would be a good thing then. Like if the group just got so big in Cincinnati, and really the only help we had it with people in Cincinnati, then that's a good thing, so we could still be this larger group and maybe on some sort of annual event or something. I mean, I think that some of these user groups have the ability to really get larger and provide more value, and it almost gets to the point of equaling or rivaling some of these early ERP systems, where there's 250 people there. It's like, wow, that's quite a bit. So I think it is one of those things. And the struggle sometimes with user groups is how do they get started? Who really starts it? And unless you've got a really passionate end user or a company that really wants to start that, it's typically done by VARs or ISVs or anyone that's sort of like, hey, let's grow this community. And so it really, in that case, it can, in ERPs, and Acumatica is certainly one of them, is they want to be cognizant. They don't want to make it sort of the fishing in a fishbowl. You know what I mean? They don't want to create that environment. And I think most people, are really trying to help grow the community. Most VARs and ISVs and like I said before, when we had met with some of the VARs in the area, I said, look, this is only going to work if you bring your customers, we bring our customers. There's things that we're going to say, and they're going to like what we say, and and there's that opportunity to pick up customers if they are interested in that. But I thought we did a good job of really kind of making it a safe place for customers to go hear about different things, and allow the community to flourish, which is really what you're looking for.
Yeah, I used to think that was a bigger sticking point than it really is. I've seen it enough times though, where it's really not a big deal. If you can't trust your customers to go to an event, then they're probably not going to be your customer for very much longer anyways, right? It's
Yeah.
not a big deal to bring it to another VARs event. And, VARs are, for the most part, pretty respectable. If they are in the situation of just trying to create a place where they can steal customers, I think it's going to be pretty obvious, and
Yeah.
it's not going to survive very long. So yeah, I don't think that's a big sticking point myself. I used to, but not anymore.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I wanted to circle back to real quick for costs. Thanks for sharing the room cost there, about $200 to $300. For last time at the Acumatica user group, we had 14 people. I just did Panera boxed dinners, and that worked out really great logistically. It was real easy to transport, and that was right about $200. So, maybe $200 to $300 for room and $200 to $300 for food if you're in the 15 to 20 people range, as a way to get started. So anyone out there, maybe if you're on the coast, multiply that by 2. We're in middle America. Things are a lot more affordable, but just to give people an idea of cost there.
Yeah, and it was when we had the sessions, we did a couple of them charge for, for lunch. So we would, and people were, most of these companies, they can easily expense a $10 to $15 lunch if it's, kind of a continuing education or, working on that. So I think that we did move to a couple of those just to reduce the need to stay with a particular sponsor for the sessions. And so in the meetings, what we did is we had a presentation by the sponsor, and then we had a presentation by a member. And so as our meetings started getting kind of shorter and shorter, what we ended up doing was really just saying, okay, let's have the presentation by the member, and the individual can pay to join us. So that was another model that we looked at. I think the presentations are hugely beneficial because it gives the people there some insight into how other companies are running the same ERP. I mean, even if you're in a different vertical, so if you're in manufacturing and you're looking at wholesale distribution, it's still, a lot of the screens are going to look similar, and so how you use them can be very similar. And so I think that it's helpful when the member presents that they're looking at either their sandbox or their production environment, but just kind of going through some of the screens, and that's probably the biggest challenge, is getting that continual flow of people coming back through and presenting. And I always tell people, it's like, it's your story. It's like telling your life. Like, you just need to come up and say, here's what we, here was the situation. This is what we did. This is what I experienced. It doesn't require a whole lot, and it can be 1 or 2 slides if you wanted to do that, just to kind of set the stage for things. But it's really, talking through that. And what will happen is, when you get up there or somebody gets up there and they start showing the screen, next thing you know, if you've got like 20 people now trying to solve your problem, or, hey, I see this, and we did that, but we changed it and sourced it from this field. Well, that's a great idea, and so that's sort of the interaction that you want to see. And I think it's a benefit of being one of the presenters, is you get a chance to share that, and have that insight and people looking at it.
Yeah, we actually experienced that at the last meeting here in Columbus, which you were at, by the way. That's what gave us the idea to do this episode. Cassie was talking about a business event challenge she was having, and the more we kept talking about it, it's like, I think we just need to see it. So she just plugged her computer into the big screen that we had there, and that's exactly what happened, right? A bunch of people just started asking questions, and we eventually kind of solved the problem as a group. And I thought it was really cool because it wasn't really a presentation. I think the problem with the presentation is it's a push. You have to come up with something, and there's a lot of prep involved. But we sort of trick someone into presenting, and it was more of a pull. it
Yeah.
wasn't a push on their side. We sort of pulled it out of them. You plug your screen in, and then we're off and running, right? You almost didn't think of it as a presentation. I thought that worked really well, and I'm hoping it happens again next week.
Yeah, I think the presentation is a big piece there. And the other one that I really loved was we would obviously have the introduction, welcome everybody, and then we would move into individual introductions. And so everybody kind of goes around and we go around the group and everyone shares, their name, their company, some of the things that they're working on or struggles that they're having or what they're hoping to get out of it. And that's another session that or portion that I just love because somebody could say one thing and sometimes it's you get somebody that's not necessarily comfortable talking, but if they say a few things and then you dig a little bit more, which is kind of the consultative side of me going into it, but you can dig that out a little bit and it kind of shows the the issue or the things that they're experiencing or maybe the modules that they're using. And the benefit of that is other people hear that and some people will start nodding. You can see they went through the same thing. And, when you look at that in those sessions, or that part of the meeting could be probably an hour to an hour and a half, depending on, how long those conversations go. But what they also do for me, organizing it is I can start to see some themes that are going to boil up that oh, okay, we probably should be covering revenue recognition because it's seems to be important for half the people here or a quarter of them. And I think that, that's where it allows you to talk about those subjects because, finding something that is valuable to the attendees can be the struggle because you can do it once, you can do it twice, but it's like, okay, how do I keep this going for topics that are important to them? And I think one of the areas that in these meetings and what people are discussing is also understanding what portion of the business that they represent. So a lot of them are at least the ones we saw were accountants. Sometimes they're more of the inventory person or they're more of the sales side of it. I don't see the sales a whole lot. I would say it's more of accounting, inventory, type areas. And so I think that finding those subjects that are important to them are also key when they're sharing, hey, I'm the controller here and we're doing this, or I'm the warehouse person, or I'm the purchasing agent. A lot of administrators, I mean, that's, a common group also.
Maybe you could walk us through end to end the most recent gathering you had, which I think was before the pandemic, but like timeline wise. So I think you said you met 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. You said you did an hour to an hour and a half introduction in there. You had a sponsor presentation. Maybe walk us through the agenda.
Yep. Yeah. So it was a welcome session. So we did have officers identified, and so it was just welcoming anyone that was there, and then introducing the officers. It was updates, like, hey, here's what's going on. Here's what's going on in this ERP world. So there's a user conference coming up. Is there a release that's coming up? It's kind of a broader group of things, but that's all what I would consider sort of the welcome time frame of it, and that's probably 15 to 20 minutes. It could be as short as 5 if there's nothing really happening. And then we would go into what I call the individual introductions, which is everybody goes around and kind of shares that. And that, again, can be about an hour, on a 20-person attendees, it's going to be about an hour. We'd then take a 10-minute break, 5-minute break. Obviously these people are have other things that they have going on, and so they need to take calls. It is also, the breaks are important also because if Tim, you were talking about something and I was like, gosh, he really knows that, and I want to ask him about it. When we take the break, I go find you and we talk about it during break. And so you want to give those opportunities for people to have those interactions.
Yeah, I like that too. Like we did a similar format. We did about first hour, just introduce yourselves. We went around the room, every person had 3 minutes. I was probably a little more of a dictator than you were. I had my timer, my 3 minute timer on to keep everyone, make sure everyone got a chance to say something. But I
Yeah,
like that because that's exactly what happens. Like, now after you go around the room, oh, I want to follow up with so and so. And so you need that break immediately after so you can go follow up right away before something else makes you forget about it.
yeah. And I think, if you are a VAR, I think, and you're leading that session or at least kind of facilitating it, the beauty of that is you probably have seen issues with that. And so you get a chance to kind of poke around it a little bit more. And you're like, oh, so when you get implemented, did you have any problems? Oh, yeah, we had tons of problems, and so there's it gives them that opportunity to kind of, I don't like glorify the problem, but at least share more details about their experience with it. But yeah, so we do the break, and it can be anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes, and then we had a presentation. The presentations generally are about a half hour. The first, in this case, the presentation one was from the sponsor, and they got a chance to share what it is that let's say if it's a particular software edition, they would cover that, and then we go into lunch, and lunch is probably half hour, 40 minutes. We bring that in. They got time to check their emails. There's usually conversations that are happening. And then we go
So
into,
I'm trying to track you timeline wise here. So you're looking, maybe your first break is around 11:15, 11:20, maybe 11:30,
yeah,
and you're doing 30-minute presentations. So lunch is right around noon
yep,
for 30 to 40 minutes.
yep,
Okay.
yep. And then we go into a presentation, second presentation. This one is the member one or attendee. And they've got a half hour. And this is one that I'm like, if it goes 40 minutes, 45 minutes, I think it's great. I think it's just means that people are engaged in that conversation. So they'll, again, do it half hour, and then we will cover any updates. Sometimes, the updates might be more, maybe some tips and tricks on things. But it's usually, again, just a little bit more general than it is specific. That's probably 15 minutes, and then 5 minutes for close, and we try to wrap up. 1 to 2. Most people aren't upset if it ends early. It's just making sure that you've got enough content. I will say, when you do have two presenters, I would always have a backup of something you want to cover, because inevitably, we had meetings in the winter and somebody's like, I couldn't get out of my driveway, or something came up and I can't make it tomorrow. And it's like, oh no. So I think having, some sort of backup or things that you want to cover, I think are important to have.
So there's a presentation by the sponsor, then you'd have a substantial user presentation, but then you'd have like a smaller, the 15-minute tips and tricks user presentation. That's the
Yeah,
two that you mean, the last
yes,
two.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. It's more of a, here's some updates, things that, if you are closer to the the ERP stakeholders, you might have some insight that you want to share with the group, or it's okay, next quarter we're talking about meeting at this. Do we want to talk about some some topics that we want to cover, or can I get somebody else to, if you haven't got a volunteer yet, could I get anybody to volunteer for that? And so it's kind of a plea of getting somebody to come and present.
And am I right that the last one was before the pandemic? So about 2 years, December 2017 till early 2020.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
how big did you get? Like what was the largest group? You started with around 20 people. What was the
yeah.
largest gathering you had that you remember?
I would say it was probably low 30s. Um, what we saw is, like I said before, the people that were coming from further distances, there were still some that made it, but those started to drop off. But we added more local people. And so, it was always interesting to meet somebody new. And they're like, yeah, I heard about this through someone. And so it's like, oh, that's great. I would say one time we had, I think it was our first or second one, we had a company or an individual from a company that had not purchased NetSuite yet. And so they were like, hey, I just wanted to come and see what the user community was like. And that was a factor for him in making his decision. And so, like I said, I think when you're looking at getting help, if you're a VAR, there are other VARs that want to help grow that. If you're an end user, leverage your relationship with local VARs, or even with let's say it's Acumatica, with the Acumatica team. There is a group at Acumatica that is focused on growing the user community. And so I think in some of the correspondence I've had with them and some of the other individuals there, I mean, I think they're very supportive and want to make it successful. So if there's even a hint that you think, hey, I want to do this, there's lots of resources to help get you started. It doesn't have to be a solo effort. And I will say, in some of the conversations I've had with other user groups, the ones that stick around are the ones where you can get buy-in from multiple people. If it's just one person kind of leading everything, the problem is when you pull that one person out, or if they're like, look, I just don't have the energy to keep it going, it can fall apart. And so that's a challenge for sure.
Yeah, so where did you land with that? Did you end up creating an official board of directors with a nonprofit, or how was the structure? How did you grow into a structure that allowed for multiple people to help coordinate it?
Yeah, so we had a board. So NetSuite, says, hey, you need to have a board, and you have at least 4 members. There can't be more than 2 VARs, on the board. And I think Acumatica has very similar rules. It has largely be organized by an end user, and I think maybe 1 VAR on there. But yeah, you had to have the group.
Did they, real quick on that point, did they require a NetSuite employee be involved in that board as well?
No, so that's, I think, unique about Acumatica, and I think that's a good thing, because again, if you look at what the agenda that we had, part of that was an update, from that. And so if you have somebody that's on the board, it certainly allows you to have that insight more readily, rather than, what did I filter from when I talked to somebody else? You know what I mean? So I think that those in the Acumatica space is a real benefit. And I think they're on the right path with that one.
Yeah, so for the Acumatica group who's organizing user groups, they're requiring that. I think it could also cut both ways, right? It also gives people a neck to choke if they're complaining about something.
Yes.
A face to represent Acumatica in the room.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what about now? Like any post-pandemic plans to start back up, or where's that at for you?
I think we're trying to figure out what makes sense. I mean, it's there's one of the other officers is here in Cincinnati, and so we're looking at, does it make sense to move to regional offices and start that? Because truly, there's probably a large enough community if you just go deep enough in that specific area. And so I think we're evaluating if we want to do that, or just simply start things up again, because most of the attendees, the last session we were in, were from Columbus. So
Yeah, it would save you personally a 4-hour drive, wouldn't it?
yeah, yes, yeah, it would. And I think that it gives you more options too, because then, if you're not having to drive 2 hours to get there, you could probably have something, midday, or you could have something at the end of the day. So there's a lot of flexibility. I think there's other user groups that, have something before work. And so I think those are, when you're not having to drive too far, it's not unreasonable to really move that around.
Yeah, speaking of 4-hour drives, I forget, are you planning to come up here next week for the Acumatica user group in Columbus?
I will not be able to make it, unfortunately. We have a meeting out in Denver, a company meeting. So I won't be able to attend that one, but I am looking forward to the following. And I thought it was the group that you had there was a good group, good mix of people that were there, and it was fun to see some of the challenges without necessarily being able to dive in and know everything about the application. So it was purely on the evaluation of what is it that they're having struggles with, and is it a people, is it a process, or is it just the application?
Yeah, and to your point earlier, I think you're right on there where you come maybe the first time or two for the novelty of it, but that drive is a killer. And I like how you did land in the middle of the day to accommodate that. But then you also made the point that it largely became a Columbus group. And so I think that's interesting for me, and it is just me organizing it right now in Columbus for the Acumatica user group. But for me, I'm limited in the room I can book. I can only book it after 5 p.m.
Yep.
So I don't have a choice there. But I think I'm sort of encouraged by your story there that maybe that's not that big of a deal, because maybe I'm mainly just attracting Columbus people anyway. So that 5 to 8 time period isn't a big deal. And so far it hasn't seemed like it's a big deal for anyone who's local in Columbus. So it's kind of encouraging.
Yeah, I think that there are people. I think it's a matter of finding the right group of people that are kind of passionate about what they're doing, and setting it up so that it doesn't take a whole lot of effort. And I always tell people, like, even getting ready for the presentation, it's like, don't spend a lot of time with this. I mean, just talk through what you've done with it. And I think as long as you put some of those responsibilities and some of those tasks and kind of chunk them up into small enough pieces that it's like, oh, well, this isn't that so bad, and it really got down to the point where it wasn't a whole lot of time, maybe an hour to prep for the meeting, and send things out. And when the happens over and over again, people begin to like, oh yeah, I can just put it on my calendar because it's next day.
Yeah, otherwise it can be hard, especially to commit 3 months out when you're on a quarterly basis. I
Right.
also thought it was interesting that you landed in a quarterly cadence, because that's what we're in right now. And it seems to work well, I think, because every month, I think that'd be too much. And every quarter is kind of the next chunk of time that makes sense there, right? So I think it feels right for a gathering that people get excited about every 3 months, because it's been long enough where you have something to share. There were a couple people 3 months ago who were still in the middle of implementing. So it'll be interesting to hear, did you get live, etc. And 3 months allows for stuff to happen, where you have an update and you have something to share.
Yeah, I forget what we're going to do. We try to create sort of like a bumper sticker idea of like, how often do we meet? And it was like 222 or something like that. It was like the second Tuesday of the second month in the quarter. And, basically it was trying to find that time, because, when you have it is important, because if it's, end of month, end of quarter, the accounting people are probably not going to be too crazy about that, because they're trying to close and get things ready for that. And so, but trying to find, I think it was the second Tuesday of the second month in the quarter.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I'm always sensitive to that myself, having an accounting background.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm aiming for, this is next week. I think what is that? That's the last Thursday of the month, for exactly that reason, to get away from closed territory. It
Yep.
always confused me why Acumatica Summit is the first week of a month, because it's like the absolutely worst time for accountants, and it's also at the end of January, so it's like that's your first close of the year.
Yes.
But I think a lot of it, event that size, a lot of it comes down to it's like the last slot available, right? So
Yeah,
yeah, that's a big point for accountants. You want to stay away from that first week or two of the month because they're busy closing the books.
absolutely.
Well, hey, this is great. I love hearing your experience there. I love being able to learn from someone who's actually done it and get some of these details. I think this is great information for myself and for anyone out there who's looking to start an Acumatica group in their area. So thanks for coming on and sharing all that information.
Yeah, glad to be with them. I mean, like I said before, the phrase "all boats rise with the tide." I mean, I think it's so important to grow the community that you work in, and only good things happen. So, give it a try.
We'll have a good time in Denver next week, and hopefully I'll catch you 3 months from now at our next gathering.
Sounds good. Thanks a lot, Tim.
All right. Well, that's it for now. We'll catch you on the next episode of AUGforums.com Real Talk. Thanks for listening, and take care.